This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. Veteran's name, Edward Young Hall. Birth, June 20th, 1937. He served in Vietnam. He achieved the rank of Brigadier General. We're recording this on 4/18/2013. I'm Will Hines, and I'm conducting this interview. No relation. So, Mr. Hall, how did you get the desire to join up and fight in the military?
Well, my dad was an Army officer, and I grew up with an interest in history. And when I was 12 years old, I decided I wanted to be an Army officer. And I stuck with that, and ended up looking for a military school, and I ended up at Texas A&M in the Cadet Corps.
Okay, so what made you decide on Texas A&M over other schools?
It was the only military college in Texas, and it has a great reputation. It's one of the, at that time, it was one of the recognized military colleges in the United States, you know, with West Point, Annapolis, and Air Force Academy. I tried to get in the Air Force Academy. I wanted to be in the first class, but I didn't have 20/20 vision, and you had to have 20/20 vision to be a pilot. So that was the main reason, but I did end up at Texas A&M. I was very happy with the choice.
And you worked for Bear Bryant on the football team?
As a freshman, I was on Bear Bryant's staff, and my mission for him was to make assignments into the Cadet Corps for potential football players. They had to come up and spend the weekend in the Cadet Corps, and he wanted them to be exposed to the Cadet Corps because in a military college, it didn't matter if you were playing football, baseball, or whatever, you had to be in the Corps. And so I let them get exposed to the Corps and see what it was about with all the things that go on in a military school. And I was asked to comment on their interest in being in the Corps, whether it was positive or negative. And if it was negative, I would indicate that on this little questionnaire. So I'm sure it helped him a lot with his decisions, because Texas A&M was not the kind of school that the student needed to be forced to be there. It wouldn't have worked. You had to want to be there. It was all voluntary. There wasn't anything drafted about Texas A&M.
So did you graduate Texas A&M before you joined
Class
the
of
military?
1960.
So class of 1960, and then where did you go from there?
Well, I graduated from the ROTC program as a distinguished military student. With that, I got a regular Army commission, which is the same that comes out of West Point. And with that, you get to choose your assignment, what branch you wanted to be in. It would be in the Army, or be in infantry or artillery or whatever. And I ended up in the armor branch. And my entry time, I got to pick my entry time, which was September of 1960. My first assignment was my choice. I had an opportunity to go to Hawaii. I went to Germany, and I'm still wondering why I did that all these many years later. But it was a good place for armor units and to be an armor lieutenant and running tanks and stuff. I was in the 3rd Armor Division. I spent 3 years in Germany at the beginning of my career.
So whenever you got out of Texas A&M, did you go into training from there in the Armor Division?
Yes, well, right away. I was in went to the Armor School at Fort Knox, Kentucky. It was a 8-week Armor Officer Basic course. And after that, you got your assignment. Well, I already knew where I was going, but they gave us a few days leave, and I went home, got married, and headed for Germany. I was in Germany by December of 1960. And I arrived in my unit in the middle of a big snowstorm. And my unit commander wanted me to join the unit in the field. And being from South Texas, I grew up in South Texas. Well, they had a lot of snow in Germany. I knew that. But I wasn't expecting to be sleeping in it my first night in Germany. And I joined my tank platoon in the field. And I didn't have all of my winter gear, such as parkas and heavy winter clothing. So my platoon, they all chipped in clothing, special clothing, extra field jackets, things like that. And slept the first night in the field under we had a 12-foot tarp that we put over the tanks. And we put this out on the snow, and then put our sleeping bags and then pull it over us, and we had a 4-man crew. And I like froze to death. Next morning, woke up, we had a foot of snow on top of us. And funny story that goes with that is that the next morning we got ready to move out, and I had so many clothes on that I couldn't get into the tank, to the Terrier. And the platoon sergeant had to call the company commander and say we'd be delayed because Lieutenant Hall had so many clothes on he couldn't get in the tank.
So what was your job in the tank?
Well, I was a platoon leader. I
Okay.
had 5 tanks I was responsible for, so I was a tank commander.
So where would you be in the tank? Would you be up
Be
on top?
in the cupola.
Mm-hmm.
You had a gunner below you, and you had a loader and a driver.
Okay.
4-man crew.
4-man crew
We had
in
5
every
tanks.
tank?
I had 19 enlisted men. The 19 enlisted men, which included platoon sergeant and second lieutenant or first lieutenant officer.
And what kind of tank were you in?
We had a M48A1 tank, which we considered to be a dog at that time, which is not a good term.
Mm-hmm.
We were waiting for the new tank to come out, the M60 tank, which was diesel. And we were looking forward to that. But I started my career in an M48 tank, and that was quite an interesting experience because they were worn out, and they were big mechanical problems by that time.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, we got the new M60 tank. Diesel engine was like getting a Cadillac. So I was very happy with it. And my unit drew the first M60 tanks that were issued, and I was one of the first platoons to get that. So it was quite a thrill to have a tank and go 300 miles on fill-up versus 50 miles of gasoline.
Wow.
So after the first night that you slept, kind of where did you go from there after that?
Well, we had a maneuver in the field, and we got back to our unit, which was Gelnhausen, Germany. And then I just began my routine of becoming a lieutenant in the Army and learning my job and learning my position as what I had to learn to do as a lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of maneuvers that went on, and continued to do that.
So day by day, did y'all do maneuvers and training? And
Well, it was a combination of maneuvers and maintenance on the tanks. We would have, we'd go down into the motor pool or into the tank park and pull maintenance on the tanks, so they'd always be ready because we were in the Cold War at this time.
Mm.
And we had monthly alerts where we would be called out at any time of the day or night and sent into our military war positions on the border, Czechoslovakian border, as if we were going to war with the Russians. So we were playing the Cold War thing.
Wow.
So did that, and we constantly training gunnery, learning everything you could about the tank, and then eventually you gained enough skill where you then began to teach and teach your troops how to do the various things. So it was quite an enjoyable experience. I enjoyed being in tanks.
So after being stationed in Germany, where did you go from there?
Well, after I was in tanks for 2 years, then I was attached and reassigned to Heidelberg, Germany, at the U.S. Army Europe staff in Heidelberg. And if you're a regular Army officer, you had to have an alternate branch. You were commissioned in a combat arm, and you had an alternate branch. And my alternate branch was Transportation Corps. So what they wanted you to do, since you're going to be a career officer, they wanted you to have 2 fields of experience. So I joined the transportation unit for my 2-year tour in transportation. And I was there until November of 1963, and then rotated back to the United States. I went to Fort Eustis, Virginia, and I then went to the basic transportation officers course. They had a special course for guys like me.
And what do you mean by transportation?
Well, transportation corps is everything on wheels, everything from sedans to trucks to fuel trucks to ships. The Navy is the Army has a Navy.
Mm-hmm.
We have aviation assets. In my particular field that they attached me to, I went into what they call a truck company, and that's where my transportation experience was. And then after I finished 2 years in transportation, then I requested permission to go back to Armor Branch, because that's where I wanted my career to be, was Armor Branch. And that was at Fort Eustis, and then I joined a tank unit at Fort Riley, Kansas, 1st Infantry Division. So I became a company commander out there, and guess what? Got the old M48 tanks again. And so I guess what they did in Germany, they shipped all the old
back to the
States, and here I've been riding around and working Cadillacs, and next thing I ended up in a old tank, had a lot of miles on. So we had maintenance, a lot of maintenance things, but got mixed up in some other things.
So you said, but you had gotten married before all this, right?
Got married just before I went to Germany. My wife eventually joined me in Germany in May of 1961. Took her 6 months to get over there. It worked out pretty well because we were in the field all the time anyway. I wouldn't have had any time to spend with my wife because we were on maneuvers, and there were always special maneuvers going on, joint maneuvers with other NATO services. A lot of time out in the snow and the mud, and so they got you acclimated pretty quick into what you're going to be doing, because at that time the concern was that we're going to be fighting the Russians, and we always were preparing to fight the Russians.
Because it's always snowing there, or
well, it's pretty chilly.
Yeah.
Germans found out the hard way too. But the thing about the tank units, which you spend a lot of time on reconnaissance, going out and learning your positions, and in case you were at war, you had not an escape route, but a withdrawal route that we had to recon to know where we were going in case we were pulling back. Because we didn't expect to be able to go toe-to-toe with 8,000 Russian tanks. We only had 2,000.
Wow.
So we had to figure out how to withdraw. And there was a lot of like on-the-job training type things, because we had a lot of draftee soldiers coming in that were learning. They'd gone to their basic training, and they joined the units in the field, and they had to be proficient. I'd teach them gunnery and things like that. So it was quite an exciting period of time. I was in Germany when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962, and our units actually moved into our war positions, thinking that when we moved out, we thought we were going to war. So,
wow.
And our dependents were being prepared to be evacuated. So it was a pretty scary time when we jumped on those tanks to move out. What we thought we were going into war. We had our tank guns were all chambered with the live rounds in them. The only thing separating the firing of that round was a safety. So we went into position, first time we've ever gone into position with loaded tank guns. At that time we had 90 millimeter. And so it was real scary, because we thought we were going into something. And it was a very, very exciting time. Of course, we got through all that. President Kennedy got us through it. And I guess that took me up to Fort Eustis, and I had my assignment, and I got back, joined another tank unit as company commander, 1st Infantry Division. So.
And so you were in Fort Eustis, is that how you say it?
Fort Eustis for about a year and a half. Got involved in a major exercise called that is 1964. We were testing a new air mobile concept, and we were working with the idea of the first air cav that was in Vietnam. It was the beginning of the first air cav. And I'm trying to think of the exercise. Can't come up with it. We'll soon, maybe.
I'm sure you'll remember it later.
But it was an exercise to see how air mobile operations would work in a Vietnam atmosphere. This is 1964 now, this is early.
Right.
And then they decided that it might work, and it might not. That was called the air assault test. It was between Fort Benning and Fort Bragg.
And what did y'all do during that test?
They tested the concept of air mobile operations, of moving troops by helicopter, our air assault assets against an enemy, which was considered to be the Russians, against their assets, such as anti-aircraft guns in the forward edge of the battle area and so forth, and just to see how it was going to work. And then, after that test was over, then they activated a unit called the 1st Air Cavalry Division, and it was this air assault ground. They were all out of Fort Benning. And they were in the first battles in Vietnam, the Battle of Ia Drang Valley and all that. These guys were all, I knew quite a few of them, and a lot of them were killed during the early days of the fighting. And it was from the air assault ground. So it was quite exciting.
So when were you deployed to Vietnam? When were you assigned?
Okay, while I was a company commander at Fort Riley, we were notified that we were going to Vietnam. My tank unit was alerted to go, and for some reason we were going to take these old dog M48A1s with us. The 1st Infantry Division is an infantry unit. They have 2 tank battalions and an infantry division, and they have 1 air cav or 1 cav squadron, 1st to the 4th Cav. Well, sometime in the early planning, after we'd already figured out how to load the trains and move all our stuff to the West Coast to be shipped, a decision was made not to take the tanks. I never really knew why, but we didn't. And everybody was in the tank units. We were reassigned to infantry units within the division, the 1st Division. A lot of tankers knew how to drive armor equipment, things like that. And these fellows were absorbed into the infantry units. The armor officers were given a choice of going to these infantry units to serve on the staff, like intelligence or operations or supply, or to go to the advanced course, which is for, at that time, if you were a senior 1st lieutenant or a captain, and you were 5 or 6 years into your career. And at that time, I was in my 5th, going on to my 6th year. I was selected to go to the Armor School at Fort Knox for my advanced course, which is like at that time, during the war era, it was like a 6-month course. In peacetime, it was a 9-month course. So we had a sort of a quick training course. And I had the choice of doing that or going to an infantry unit. I decided that I wanted to go to the advanced course, but I had been told that when I finished that and came back to the division, that I had a possibility of commanding a troop in the 1st to the 4th Cav. I was very happy about that. But when we got to the armor school, they decided that they would have some high casualties among the advisor. We had advisor units there, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, and they were training the Vietnamese Army in all branches of their service, infantry, armor, artillery. And we had some heavy casualties in the 1965, 66 time frame. And they were looking for volunteers to go into these positions. Well, we had an officer who came to the armor school and asked for volunteers from the graduating class to go to MAGV, Military Assistance Command Vietnam. Nobody volunteered. Because we all wanted to go back to our units. I mean, we knew the people who were serving with and we'd been serving with. So nobody volunteered. But they said, well, we'll take care of that. We'll flip a coin, and all the regular Army officers in here, we're looking for 17 guys that flipped a coin and said heads were at the top of the alphabet, tails were at the bottom. We had heads, and there I was. I got my orders changed to U.S. Army Vietnam, MAGV, and I ended up over there instead of going back to my unit. And I was a very unhappy soldier. It turned out all right. And
so you went over to Vietnam and you helped train the Vietnamese Army?
I went to Vietnam, got to Vietnam in July 1966. I was assigned to Advisor Team 100, which was called Capital Military District. And we had 7 districts around the city of Saigon. And I was in the operations area. That's the military terms, that would be G3. So it means the GIS means the General Staff, and they were responsible for the defense of Saigon. And my job in what we call the 3 shop, I was the air liaison officer to better known as G3 Air, and I took care of the aviation assets as we were use them to support the various units. And that was one of my jobs. And then after several months in there, I was sent out to another unit of one of these, what we call the subsector. The Advisor Team 100 had units, advisory units of 6, 7, 8 men out with the Vietnamese. And I was attached to a group in a little village called Canjo, C-A-N-G-I-O, Canjo. And I was there for 7 months. And we had infantry, we had an infantry battalion of Vietnamese troops. And we trained them, we went on operations in the area. We were in an area called the Run Sot Special Zone, which is a swamp, 400 square mile swamp just south of Saigon. And our mission was to keep the VC from sinking a ship in the Saigon shipping channel, coming in off the South China Sea that went up to what they call Newport in Saigon, where they would bring in supplies. And if that was blocked, it would literally cut the supply line. And we were protecting that artery with operations to keep the VC from getting hold of something and sinking a ship, with a mine or firing a rocket or something into the side of the ship.
So how would you stop them from doing that?
Well, we went on operations. We went out looking for them. We had a battalion of infantry, and we conducted operations, and the VC would infiltrate through this area.
Through the swamp area?
Yeah, through the swamps. We had a 16-foot tide, and anybody that's served in that area will know exactly what it was like. The name was it was called the Rung Sot Special Zone. Rung Sot in Vietnamese stands for killer forests. And in the old days, they had pirates down in there that would stop the sampans and take their stuff. And so it had a long history of being in that type of operations through the area. It's just a swamp. 16-foot tide came in every so many hours, you had to plan all your operations so you didn't get caught out without a boat somewhere.
How deep was it without the tide?
Well, got the ocean right there on the beach. So we had a 16-foot tide, so during the day the area may be be underwater, and then as the tide went out, it would expose the mud flats, like in a swamp.
How often would you find the Viet Cong in there?
We were out looking for them all the time, and we had encounters with them, and later the 9th Infantry Division came in and helped us out with this. So we had contact. We were out in a little old Vietnamese village of just 6 or 7 of us with the Vietnamese, and we were subject to an attack at any time. We were a long ways from what we call the flagpole. Our only evacuation route in case the enemy came in and attempted to overrun our base was to go to the beach and swim out onto what they call fish stakes. The Vietnamese fishermen would have nets set up to catch fish coming and going in the tide, and go out there and hope we'd get picked up by Navy boats coming in. So, yeah, it was an exciting time.
Did you speak Vietnamese?
I went to a 2-week course of instruction on Vietnamese to learn important things like help, need ammunition, learn military terms, which I've forgotten most of them. But now I never did get very proficient in Vietnamese.
But y'all probably had interpreters with
Well,
you.
we had an interpreter, plus the Vietnamese were a lot of the personnel we worked with could speak pretty good English with us. And one of my jobs there, as an advisor, you were there to work with the people and civic action stuff. We weren't out involved with the enemy forces or on operations. I taught in an elementary school there. I would teach them things about America. I would use National Geographic magazines, and I would talk to them about America and what we were. And I worked out a deal with them. They teach me Vietnamese, I teach them English, and they did a lot better with English than I did with Vietnamese. But it was a lot of fun. I did write a book about my experiences.
Really?
I wrote a book called In the Valley of the Shadow, and it was introduced by General Westmoreland. I knew Mr. General Westmoreland, and I briefed him several times. And years later, I told him I was writing a book about Vietnamese experiences where we were advisors. And he told me that, and I actually made contact with him at the 1982 dedication of the Vietnam Wall. And General Westmoreland, as you may know, is from Spartanburg. He grew up in Spartanburg, went to Spartanburg High School. But anyway, he was the marshal. He was the marshal of the Welcome Home Parade that was conducted with the dedication of the Vietnam Wall. They had a big Welcome Home Parade. And he was a parade marshal, and he came over to visit the delegation from South Carolina. At the time, I was on the staff at Wofford after I retired. Mm-hmm. And I told him what I was doing. And he said, well, you go ahead and write the book. He said, and I'll introduce it for you. And he did. He introduced the book, and it's the only book on Vietnam that he introduced, that he wrote an introduction for. It's a little paperback. Sold a lot of them in Army, Navy, PX stores around the world. So
That's awesome.
Your Clemson library may have a copy.
I bet it does.
And they can request it through the system. They can get it. Valley of the Shadow is by me. So
Valley of the Shadow. All right.
we might be able to get it. They're all we had. I had about 10,000 copies. They're all gone. So.
Oh, wow.
And have not reprinted it yet, but might do it.
Neat.
It's about my experience as an advisor. Yeah.
Okay. And your experience with the people there.
Yeah.
So when you were in that village, where did you go from there? Did you just stay there for?
Yeah, I was there for the rest of my tour. I left in July of 1967, thinking I was going to the university. Well, I was going to Wofford College. I had orders to ROTC duty at Wofford College. When I got to Wofford, they didn't know I was coming. They did not have a copy of my orders. But this was a lot of turmoil with the troops moving around, coming and going to the Vietnam War, and millions of guys moving around. But they welcomed me, and I reported for duty, and I was here about 2 weeks, and the guy showed up with orders to Wofford College. They found out that I was supposed to have gone to the University of Georgia. And I had the option of going to the University of Georgia, but we'd already moved into a house. My wife would have killed me if we'd had to move again down to Athens. But my dad played football at the University of Georgia, and he was commissioned in the Army from Georgia in 1926. And I'm from LaGrange, Georgia. That's my hometown.
Oh, wow.
So we left there when I was 9 years old to go to Texas.
So you did ROTC here for a while?
Here for 3 years on ROTC duty. Met a lot of the fellows that later became the people running Wofford College. Joe Lassane was an associate professor, and we became good friends. And later on, when he was here and I was in the area, I ended up at Wofford after I retired. But after, let's see, where are we? We had at Wofford College for 3 years, and then I taught military history. I taught.
So you're a professor here?
Yeah, we were associate professors, and I was a captain. And got promoted to major while I was here, and I had the responsibility of regular teaching too. And I had the flight program for 2 years here, and we had a program for senior cadets that could get their pilot's licenses. The military was trying to enhance the aviation program because of a shortage of pilots. Mm-hmm. So they figured a lot of the graduating seniors if they could get their pilot's license, then they'd be ready for flight school. So that's what we did. I had 18. And we did very well. We were one of the top aviation, ROTC aviation units in the country.
Wow.
So we trained 18. All of them went into aviation training.
So when did you get up to Brigadier General?
I retired in 1980, and after I was retired, then I was associated with the South Carolina National Guard, and they were setting up a program to have a South Carolina State Guard, which was a militia that had been in the United States, or back in the 1600s, back in the early days of South Carolina history. It was a militia, and during World War II, World War I, World War II, it was brought back as an auxiliary. And the state of South Carolina wanted to do that again, so I got involved with them in the early 1980s as a general staff officer to help organize the program. And we had volunteers coming in from all over the state of South Carolina, many of them prior military service. We had 3 brigades, and I continued to function with them, and I was a brigade commander and brigadier general there.
And what would y'all do? Would y'all do drills?
We would auxiliary of the National Guard, unpaid auxiliary. Are you familiar with Hurricane Hugo? You remember hearing?
I don't remember, but I remember
heard
it. Yes, sir.
Okay, we had Hugo, and the State Guard was very involved in the recovery operations. We were down there directing traffic when the South Carolina National Guard showed up, and we had called ourselves out. The state didn't call us out to duty. We called ourselves out. And we were on the job when they got there, and active military Army units were coming in, and we were already out there working.
Nice.
So I think it was somewhat of an embarrassment to the adjutant general, but I think he was looking for a photo op of coming into Charleston, and we were directing traffic, so I don't think it went over very well with it. But we did a good job with that, and we got a lot of platitudes for it. During the 9/11, our unit was up in New York. We served in New York as part of the security force. And it's the first time the State Guard militia had been sent out of South Carolina since the Civil War.
Wow.
So we had to have special permission from the governor to go. And we went up there to assist the military operations.
And so have you retired from that?
Yes, I retired from all of that in 2005, and combined service between the Army and the Guard, about 45 years service.
Wow.
I'm not completely out of it because we started a military funeral detail in 1998, and we do military funerals around the state to assist the active units, the reserve units, National Guard units, a private citizen, deceased, ex-military. The family wants a military funeral. The person had not been in the, retired or anything. Mm-hmm. But under that criteria, that person is authorized a military recognition. Now, if you're retired from the military, you get a full military funeral. Or if you have certain decorations like Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross, Medal of Honor, you will get a regular military funeral. Mm-hmm. But the family has to request it. But if you've been served 2 years or whatever, then you can request it, and they will send a 3-man detail, fold the flag, present the flag.
Wow.
What we do in our group, we give a full military funeral upon request, complete with the firing salute. And this group that we started in 1998 under the South Carolina State Guard has done 1,100 funerals since then.
Wow.
So I did one the other day. So I present flags primarily. I'm a flag presenter. Mm-hmm. The group will fold the flag and then we'll present it to the next of kin. So that's quite an honor to do that. So and it's quite a good recognition for a person that served just a couple of years or so. And it seems to be working pretty well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Hall. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking. Yes, sir.